Oh, yeah. Yeah. I do.
Don't antagonize.
Well, that was hilarious.
Oh, Alex.
Hey, clear the bridge again, the quality is going off. Okay?
What happened?
I don't know. It just went away.
The IFB drop?
Yeah.
Put you on the bridge. Stand by.
It's still better.
Yes. Yes, I'm right next to it. What do you need? It's calling that. It's telling us. You got a second call.
Okay.
I don't think today will be that day, Alex. I don't think today will be the day.
Where's you hang up? There are safety concerns in your home.
I have to.
Yeah, something like that. Something about safety in this home.
Yeah. If I care.
Probably very important.
Okay, I think it's got to stop now. You ready?
They need to talk to me.
Yeah, could you test New York? Could you test the IFB line with them in Antonio?
You're right. Big air one. It's a big deal. It's like 6 months or 6 2.
Yes.
Yes,
Tell
you
them
do.
I hear.
No. Pence, I think Pence
Thank you
is
very
like
much.
6 feet. Hey, ruling on this? Anybody? Everyone looks just seems like merch. Everyone looks just fine. I think everyone's like
Crazy, huh?
He's like 6'3". Listed in the program?
And you know the college ADs always boost their height by about, so he's really about 5'8".
That is beautiful.
See, this is what it's like when you're so high up. You
All people are short. I mean, Erdogan is in our club. He's very tall. And also,
So you can send sound to the headphone and the Bluetooth at the same time.
That's a good, I think it's like Pence's expression is like this. I think he's.
yeah.
He's reaching.
angry
He's
tall.
like, he's trying, he's stretching the neck.
They like white knuckling this sort of thing. Is that like?
Yeah.
Maybe it's just because he has such a big head. Yeah, how did they get that? I don't know. They hold his driver's license.
Actually, she's over there.
We actually do have that. There's a measure around.
But to like look at someone and be like, tell me.
the distance, and then like, I don't know how you. Is there some distance there? You'll tell you. I don't think you'd have to get through this. And that's what this is. Yeah, yeah. And no, he just
There's more of a tradition of casual street
Thank you.
I got the
No, it was like, just to say like, in the top part, it was
It's summer. Shooting stuff on my iPhone lately. That's close enough.
yeah,
Use an extra mode too. Like you can, yeah, but you can use the phone and a Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi combined. Yeah.
Takes like a minute to get fully unfix something. Phone I have one phone that's 5K.
Good morning, everyone. Today is a very sad day for us as we all awaken to the sad news of the passing of our dear friend, revered and respected colleague, Congressman, Mr. Chairman Elijah Cummings of Maryland, my brother in Baltimore. He was in the Congress. Elijah was considered a North Star. He was a leader of towering character and integrity. He lived the American dream. In his own family, his parents were sharecroppers. He Phi Beta Kappa from Howard and a chairman of a very important committee in the Congress of the United States. He lived the American dream, and he wanted it for everyone else. He spoke with unsurpassed clarity and moral integrity when he spoke on the floor. I had the just coincidental opportunity to be at breakfast with someone who served with him in the state legislature in Maryland. And he said when Elijah Cummings would stand up in the state legislature, in the House of Delegates, as it's called there, the room would fall silent because everyone wanted to hear what Elijah has to say. And that is, of course, what was the case in Congress, in his committee, and in the country. He used to always say, our children are our living messengers to a future we will never see. So he wanted to be sure that future was going to be better for them and that they would bring with them our values. In that regard, in terms of a better future, I'm so proud that this morning Richie Neal announced in the markup and the hearing that they were having on H.R. 3, lowering the cost of prescription drugs, that he was suggesting to name the bill for Elijah Cummings. So appropriate because Elijah was a fighter for lowering the cost of prescription drugs, reaching across the aisle to do so. He always strove to reach across the aisle and treat all of our colleagues with respect, and even had dialogue with the president for a while on this subject. So it would be very appropriate that H.R. 3 would now be the Elijah Cummings low drug cost now legislation, whatever the formal title will be. It's very sad for all of us. We've all lost a friend. I'm devastated by the loss. Conveyed our condolences of our caucus to Maya, his dear wife, this morning, and she said what we all knew. He just fought to the end. But that's the way he was, not only on his personal health, but what he believed in the Congress of the United States. So we're back now after our district work period. We're members all over the country. We're part of a drumbeat for H.R. 3 for our For the People agenda. Our first, number one, was to lower the cost of prescription drugs. They presented H.R. 3, heard feedback, and we are benefiting it with two markups this week, one in energy and commerce, the other in education and labor. The hearing in Ways and Means this week, and then the markup next week. And then we'll be well on our way to reconciling different versions and bringing something to the floor. I think it's really important to note that since the break, toward the end of the break, we did get this Congressional Budget Office, the CBO score of $345 billion in savings just in the Medicare Part D part of the bill. Other savings, $158 billion in savings for family households, $46 billion in rebates and the rest. So the savings are considerable, and the Congress will decide how they will be. Some of it will be reinvested into innovation at the National Institutes of Health, perhaps in community health centers across the country, and expanded benefits for Medicare, visual, hearing, dental. Perhaps that's up to the committees. We'll hear back from them, and just trying to lower the cost to the community. Bobby Scott's committee is marking up this bill, but as many of you know, earlier in the week we announced his College Affordability Act, and we're very proud of the response from the members on that, and that will be making college less expensive. We're still at work on the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement and making progress every day on our path to yes, but we're not there yet. As soon as we can get the assurances from the administration and from everyone involved that there will be enforceability of some of the provisions of the legislation, that it will really be an improvement on the current NAFTA, then we'll be able to proceed. But I'm optimistic about that. I'm still hoping that, and this came up across, although we were focused on for the people agenda, lower health care costs, build bigger paychecks by building the infrastructure of America, cleaner government. That was our agenda in the campaign. One of our priorities in this session has been to reduce the risk of gun violence in our country. It's now been 232 days since we sent our bipartisan legislation to the Senate. Every day, about 100 people die from gun violence, nearly half of them children up to the age of teenagers. My colleague, Frederica Wilson, when I was in Florida during the break, gave me this bracelet made from a bullet and the orange color of gun violence prevention. So we're not going away until we get legislation passed to reduce gun violence in our country. As you know, this has been a week of some issues that relate to our foreign engagement. I was very proud of the work on the floor of Congress to associate ourselves with the democratic aspirations of the young people of Hong Kong. I've been working with now 3 generations of Hong Kong democratic leaders just for the Chinese regime to obey the basic law under which Hong Kong was to exist, one country, 2 systems, living under the basic law, which made certain guarantees that are not being lived up to. But Congress came through this week, spoke very clearly in a bipartisan way about our support for that. Now we are eager that we have bipartisan support in the Senate too, so hopefully that will come up soon there. As you know, yesterday on the floor, 354 members voted in a bipartisan way to oppose the president's dangerous decision in regard to Syria. By 2-1, Republicans voted to oppose the president's actions. There were only 60 votes in favor of the legislation. The legislation would have called for Turkey to use restraint, for us to help our friends, to be a trustworthy ally to Kurds, especially in humanitarian needs now that they're being bombed by the Turks or being attacked by the Turks. It also calls for the president to show a clear plan for how Americans will be protected from ISIS, which has been further unleashed. Green light to the Turks, actions taken that are renege on our handshake with the Kurds, and now we need to have a plan to deal with what happens with ISIS. As you know, that was the subject of conversation yesterday at the White House. I also pointed out to the president I had concerns that the L road seemed to lead to Putin. The Russians have been trying to get a foothold in the Middle East for a very long time unsuccessfully, and now the president has given them an opportunity with the Kurds reaching out to them for support in Syria. They have the Russians were the beneficiaries of any withholding of assistance or encouragement to the Ukraine. Again, Putin benefits. The Russians benefited, Putin did. The president placed some doubt about our commitment to NATO right from the start of his administration. All roads lead to Putin. Then the president said, well, the reason I'm taking the troops out of Syria is because I promised in the campaign to bring the troops home. My question to him was, is Saudi Arabia home? Is Saudi Arabia home? Why are our troops going to Saudi Arabia if you promised to bring them home? He said, well, the Saudi Arabians are paying for it. Really? We're putting our troops in harm's way for Saudi Arabia because they're paying? It just didn't add up. But what it did do was cause a meltdown on the part of the president because he was unhappy with those questions. And it was unfortunate because we really we were invited to the meeting. The president started off the meeting by saying, I don't know who asked for this meeting, I didn't. And we're like, well, let's proceed anyway. And we had hoped that our real mission was to find out what the plan was. Leader Schumer was very forceful in that discussion with the president on what is the plan. My plan is to protect America, so that's a goal, that's not a plan. What is the plan for us to be protected from ISIS now that some of them have been unleashed in Syria because of the green light that the president